Outcast, Kingsman, Old Man Logan, Civil War, Wanted, Reborn, Space Bandit,
MPA, Empress, Starlight, King of Spies, Magic Order, American Jesus, The Ultimate, Superman Red Sun, and many, many more. On sale in December, the Magic Order American Jesus Nightclub Issue 1 for only $1.99 a month.
Hey folks, welcome to the new Miller Time. I've got Chuck Dixon here this week. And it's funny, a lot of people think of Chuck as a tough guy writer, but he does that so well, but he also does funny stuff as well, like SpongeBob, Simpsons. He's great at all this stuff. And that's what makes me really like him as a writer. I mean, I first discovered him 30 years ago, and there doesn't seem to be anything he can't do. He's comfortable in any genre. He's an interesting guy as well. You know, he just seems like he's got a bit of a hinterlands, you know, unlike the rest of us who just sit typing all day, you know. So I'm so delighted to have him here. Thanks for taking the time, Chuck.
Sure thing.
And it's funny, like we met actually 25 years ago. I was like trying to break. I mean, I was working at DC, but just only loosely. I was just keeping my head above the water. And we had lunch. Right. Me, you, Grant Morrison, and Ron Mars. I don't know if you remember. We were trying to do some crossover with Green Arrow, The Flash.
Yeah, but you were there in lieu of Grant. He didn't show up. He sent you.
I was taking any gig that was going, you know, if it meant having lunch, you know, I probably couldn't have afforded the lunch otherwise, you know. So.
At least you got to eat that day.
But do you do much of the conventions? Are you on that scene? Because
no, even before COVID, I was like maybe going to store appearances and stuff within driving distance, but I wasn't traveling. No, just too busy writing to go do anything like that.
A lot of guys seem to be at a convention every weekend, don't they? Like, I go to one every couple of years and I love it, but it's such a big chunk of time, isn't it? You know, to travel there and kind of do all this stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's a grind. You know, I mean, it's more fun when I was younger. So.
Yeah, I think especially when there's kids and everything in your life and everything, it's really hard to sacrifice a weekend, isn't it? But when I do, I mean, I go mental. I have a great time when I'm there, but like, but it's rare, unfortunately, now, you know. But it's funny, like, so I mean, most people I think know of, you sort of starting out in the 80s on that American indie scene and everything. But I actually don't know much about your life before that, you know. Like, I know everything kind of from Airboy on and all that kind of 80s, 90s stuff and everything that you were doing. But what were you like as a kid and teenager, and any jobs before comics and everything? Because you were about 30 when you broke onto the scene, weren't you?
Yeah, I kind of got into comics late in life. I didn't go full-time pro till I was 32.
Right.
I had a lot of jobs before that. I mean, drove an ice cream truck. I was a security guard. I wrote a few children's books. I did a little bit of storyboarding in the advertising business. I was a janitor, you know. It's like whatever. And just kept taking runs at the comic companies, working up the nerve and taking a run at DC and Marvel every once in a while. But growing up, I was just a kid, Philadelphia suburbs, read a lot of comic books, nothing really remarkable there.
And what stuff were you reading? Like, I mean, what period would that be that you were reading comics? Like, would that be early 70s? Or?
Oh no, I'm like Marvel age. I mean, my first Spider-Man I bought on the stands was Spider-Man 3.
Oh really?
Hulk #2. So yeah, I was prime age for what Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko were doing.
And were you into it right away? Did you love it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was so into Spider-Man, it's insane. Yeah. But I read every kind of comic. I just love the medium.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm still around, because I never specialized in one character or one genre. I read everything. Dennis the Menace comics, whatever came down the pike.
And was your mom and dad into it, or brothers or anything like that?
No, my dad was a big fan of Prince Valiant.
Right.
And my two sisters read comics occasionally.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time in the hospital as a kid, and they bring me comic books,
right,
as a distraction.
And what, had you had an accident, or was it an illness?
No, I was born with like massive facial deformities, and I had like 7 operations from 5 weeks old to 7 years old.
Wow.
to basically make me look like I look now.
But it's interesting actually because I remember Len Wein was the same, and a few guys I've spoken to over the years, but they had periods in hospital, and sometimes that time on your own, you go into yourself and you get into fantasy world. It's like something like Superman or Tarzan or something. That's what keeps you going when you're lying. Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, my buddy Gary Quapis, he says that every comic creator either was either sick a lot as a kid or hates their dad.
That's probably true, yeah. And it's funny because I do think you have a particular bent that your stuff. You're really good at a lot of things, but I think you're really good at flesh and blood heroes. And is that the kind of stuff you liked as a kid? Were you into? Because it sounds like you were into a lot of things, like you were into Hulk and everything, as well as the kind of more human kind of heroes. Did you just like everything, really?
Yeah, I liked everything, but the human. I mean, when Spider-Man, the Hulk, things like that came along, and you had these heroes who had real problems, there were real stakes in their lives.
Yeah,
it wasn't just they were going to be late for a date with their girlfriend.
Yeah,
there was something really real going on. And I responded to that. And I guess, that's the way I approach comics because of, but I like Sergeant Rock and, the DC war characters, because there were real stakes, real consequences to what they did.
And the Marvel heroes feel quite close to that, don't they? They're kind of like real people wearing costumes, where the DC stuff are more like gods, right?
Yeah. DC, when I was in that period, DC comics were all like puzzle comics. The hero was trying to solve some conundrum. Whether it was Superman, Batman, Flash, Green Lantern, it was whatever. There was some, something he had to figure out by the end of the story. Yes. Whereas the Marvel characters were either punching their way out of their problems or failing.
That's a great point, because people obviously, in the Superman movie, they don't like the first one because Superman doesn't punch anybody. But weirdly, for 40 years, Superman didn't punch anyone in the comic books. It was all his villains were cerebral. They were like Lex Luthor or Brainiac or something. It was all, you're right, it was problem solving, and it was like outwitting everybody, wasn't it? Where Marvel was a slugfest. It was like Jack Kirby's Slugfest, wasn't it?
Right. And when they did have a challenge, it was, a guy comes to eat the planet.
Yeah.
So it was a big problem for everybody.
But I wonder, the DC stuff, I think when I was a kid, I used to always think especially the Silver Age stuff was more like fairy tales, weren't they? They were almost more like fairy tales, where Marvel was teen drama, wasn't it? But little kids really respond to that old DC, that 50s DC stuff.
Yeah. There was, characters who were magical, and there was, whimsy, things that were absent in the Marvel stuff.
And did you get into, I know you like First, Eclipse, all those guys, the American indie scene. Like, did you get into that with a view to being at DC and Marvel, or were you just happy doing comics?
I was just happy doing comics. If I had, if Eclipse was still around, I'd still be working for him. I mean, I just wanted to do anything. I didn't have like, if I don't do Batman, I'll die, or anything like that. I just wanted to work in the medium, and it didn't matter what it was. It was Bigfoot humor, superheroes, war, horror. Yeah. I just dig telling stories in a sequential series of static pictures for some reason.
It is a weird addiction, isn't it? But it really is great, isn't it? Because you don't have to think about budget. You don't have to describe everything for the reader, because the artist is doing that side of it and everything. It's a beautiful thing to work in, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's just, from reading so many comics when I was a kid, really studying them, it just sort of seeped into my DNA. I mean, this is what I was put here to do.
What was that scene like? That kind of the 80s and American indie scene? Because as a reader, right, I'd be getting into the comic shop, and that stuff was always off to one side. Marvel was so dominant, and then you'd DC, but then you'd amazing stuff like Howard Chaykin doing American Flag and everything. But it didn't feel as if there was a lot of readers with that stuff. Were guys making a living? Did you have to work another job when you were doing American indie books at that stage in the industry?
Well, I mean, I was getting the same. It was all a matter of how many pages you could get. I mean, I was getting the same page rate at Eclipse. At the same time, I broke in at Marvel doing stuff for Larry Hama on Savage Sword of Conan.
Yeah.
And when he gave me the lead feature on Savage Sword of Conan, that was enough to quit my day job.
Right.
So I had Airboy, I had Savage Sword. So I was actually making a better living than I've ever had before. I was able to, set a wedding date with my fiance and all that stuff. Start acting like a grown up again.
That's a great moment when you can actually make a living just doing comics, isn't it? Like, that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, then it's how long will it last?
And it's funny because Larry Hama, I always think of you two a little bit intertwined, because Larry seemed like a big deal in your early career, didn't he? Were you guys good friends? Did you form
we weren't like friends, but we had a great working relationship. I mean, he really, once I proved I was reliable.
Yeah.
And, Larry said to me just a couple of years ago, he said, your stories make sense. You hand your work in on time and your characters are likable. He says, and they'll never forgive you for that. So, I mean, he went around once I proved that I, could meet a deadline.
Yeah.
And could take criticism.
Yeah.
And he went around to every editor at Marvel and recommended me as a guy to work with. So.
He's a guy, I don't know Larry, actually. He's one of the few guys I don't know, but you only ever hear good things about Larry Hama. Like, people seem to really like him,
Yeah, he can be tough at first. When you first approach him, he puts you through the acid test to see if you can take criticism.
Yeah.
And he's really mean.
Yeah.
But I had been forewarned about that. So I just sort of rolled over him. I told him that he needed me.
And do you remember now what his criticism was, like his first insight?
Well, basically it was just, who the hell are you? What do I need you for?
Right.
And that was it. Just like the put down. Now are you going to come back? And I did.
Yeah.
I know lots of artists. I mean, he told Lee Weeks. Lee Weeks called and said he wanted to come in and show his portfolio.
Yeah.
And Larry said, "Don't bother because you suck."
Oh my God!
And
really?
And Lee said, well, "Where did you see my work?" And he goes, "I've never seen your work. I can tell by your voice on the phone." Now, at that point, Lee should have said, "F you, I'm coming in anyway. I'm coming in Wednesday, and God damn it, you're going to look at my portfolio," because that's what Larry was looking for.
Right. I mean, Lee Weeks is amazing as well.
Is incredible.
So good. That's amazing. I mean, it's funny because editors are so different now, aren't they? You hear stories of guys in the business in the 60s and 70s, and it sounds hardcore, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like boot camp or something, And they were quite often kids who were coming in, like 16-year-old kids, and being berated by 45-year-old editors.
Well, you have 45-year-old men berating other 45-year-old men. It was horrible, especially, DC. I mean, I think Stan treated everybody with a great deal of, egalitarianism, but DC's editors, they were monsters. They were psychotic. They were abusive. They were horrible.
And in the old days, like 67.
Oh, yeah. Mort Weisinger and Bob Kanigher and guys like that.
Yeah.
You talk to I used to talk to Murphy Anderson a lot. He was telling me these nightmare stories about him tearing up artwork.
Really? Never heard that.
I think it was Kanigher would stand on his desk and make you jump in the air for a check.
What? Really?
Yeah, if you asked for a check, you used to be able to ask for a check. Like, I need money for the weekend. Yeah. I'm handing the story in next week. Could I have a little bit of an advance?
Yeah.
But if you went in to get the advance, Kanigher would stand on his desk and make you jump. And Murphy said I was tall, so I always got the check.
Somebody told me they met Kanigher. It was a British comics artist. They met Kanigher, and he sat them down and explained how he would fight and win World War III inside a month. And that was the first conversation they had.
Kanigher used to have a sofa at the DC offices when he left as an editor, no longer got an office. He had this sofa, and if you went in on a Wednesday and he got a hold of you, you were going to sit with him for a while he told you stories. And they were always surreal.
These guys did great books, didn't they? I mean, not to condone slapping down your talent and everything.
No.
but I mean, the Weisinger era of Superman is like phenomenal. Kanigher had Sergeant Rock with Joe Kubert and all those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, George.
Kanigher's a terrific writer. I mean, I learned basically how to write from him. He gave me some scripts, and that's the script form I still use.
I think your stuff reminds me. You and Garth Ennis feel like the modern day Canigers to me. You know, like you can see the DNA and the stuff. And it's weird because Garth, I don't think read that stuff. He read more British stuff growing up.
Oh yeah, yeah. But well, that's good company to be in. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny because, like I say, there's things that you've done that you don't really think of. And around that period, you did The Hobbit, which I don't own a copy of. I think it was too expensive for me when it came out. You know, my budget was very limited, but I remember it coming out. And if I remember right, though, it sold a ton of copies, didn't it? I mean,
it still sells well. It's still.
Is it available to buy as a collection now? Can you pick it up?
It's always in print somewhere.
Right.
It's definitely the biggest selling thing I've ever worked on. I mean, worldwide sales have been huge.
Would you any rough idea what it sold?
No, I know. If it sold like 2 million copies, I wouldn't be surprised.
It's crazy. And when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, it must have just capitalized.
Oh yeah, it blew up all over again. Yeah. It blew up all over.
Do you get royalties?
Yeah. Finally.
Awesome.
When I did it for Eclipse, Dean had me sign their standard contract, which is an amazing contract. I mean, it's like the Bill of Rights. You know, it benefits the creator more than the publisher. Right. And I had to do a little, get somebody to go after them, but Tolkien Estate finally acknowledged that they had to follow that contract.
Right.
Because that contract guaranteed me royalties no matter what happened. I mean, alien invasion, it didn't matter what happened, I get those royalties.
That's fantastic. I'm so pleased that Eclipse was a good place to work, because when I was a teenager, I loved the books. I used to pick up a lot of Eclipse books, and I picked up a lot of First comics and all that. So these guys were all good guys. Yeah, they're good guys.
Yeah. I mean, it was they were hardcore communists, but we always got along. As you know, that's like the opposite end of the spectrum from me. But they always kept their promises. They always paid on time. They didn't seem to mind. They enjoyed arguing with me. I mean, that's back when you could have political differences and still be friends.
Because it's funny. I mean, you and I, we talked about this over email. I was going to talk to you about it, and it is funny. Like, one of the things I love about comic book conventions growing up when I was a kid and discovering them for the first time is you'd never meet two people the same. Everybody was eccentric in their own way. A little bit crazy, But I was so mesmerized by this when I was a kid, because I met all these people who weren't like me, and you learn from people who are not like you, because sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes people who are completely against everything you believe in are correct. Sometimes, and that's what makes it work, isn't it? And if I'm out with my pals, I'm a member of the most left-wing party in Europe, but some of my best friends are conservatives, and that's what makes dinner and drinks in the pub a good laugh. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I always, if you meet someone and talk to them and you find out from why they feel the way they feel, what happened in their life or what brought them to this place.
Yeah.
And even if you don't agree with them, you can go, well, you earned that opinion.
Yeah.
My problem is when you learn your opinion, somebody tells you, be against this, okay, because that's cool. That's the cool thing to do. No, I have no time for that. But, if someone's, has real reasoning and they can argue the issue, if they can explain their stance on why they not just tell you you're wrong and you're a monster and go away. So,
and I mean, maybe I'm wrong about America, but it strikes me as a very recent thing, like intolerance of thought. Like I would guess it's 5 to 10 years old. Like prior to that, I didn't think. I mean, people would argue with each other, but they weren't trying to get guys fired and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Is it quite a recent thing? Do you think?
Yeah. I think it's kind of gone nuclear in the last few years. I think it was always around, but people got canceled or blacklisted for a lot of different reasons. I mean, comics, there's cliques.
Yeah.
And if a new clique moves in to run the company and you're not part of that clique, the phone doesn't ring anymore.
Yeah.
So they just move on. But the actual active trying to ruin people's careers, or ruin their reputation, that's just the last few years.
Well, it's funny. I saw I got an email from a friend a couple of days ago who's a director, and he had heard that somebody was an ardent Republican who had been campaigning in the most recent elections, for the Republicans, and he said about an actor, and he said, "I'm not going to work with this guy." He said he's a great actor, but ethically I can't work with him because he was campaigning for something I don't believe in. And I don't know, I mean, I would be most likely to be a Democrat if I lived in the US, But even I was appalled. I was like, how can you deprive a man of his livelihood because you have an ideological difference over quantitative easing or something like that? You know, like so it's so preposterous to me, and especially when you take it to comics where we have all these things in common, and comic guys always get on with each other and everything. It's those kind of culture wars in comics was such an odd period. I feel it's coming to an end as well.
Yeah, you see pushback, and even some of the corporations are starting to say, "Whoa, wait a minute, what the hell are we doing here?" Yeah. You know, we're losing money, we're hemorrhaging cash because we're not only turning off half our audience, we're telling half our audience to stay away.
Yes,
which that doesn't work in business, and so yeah, I mean, it all should be based on merit, especially in a creative thing. You know, if some guy brings people into the movie theater because of his name, who cares who we voted for?
Well, I always think about guys like, H.P. Lovecraft or something, like,
yeah.
Like, can you imagine, like real
problematic.
Yeah. But as much as, he could be horrific in the worldview or whatever, he brought something to the table which we'd never seen before. The minute you start eliminating what, the most eccentric talent, you end up losing something from your culture in an enormous way, don't you? It's a monoculture.
Well, I early in the indie thing, I mean, I think because I was an outspoken conservative, not in my work, but in person.
Yeah.
I think I was seen as like an exotic. And I would be hired to do things that they thought, this really needs a conservative to write this.
Yeah.
And so I think I got a lot of work based on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I think, your worldview, I think, actually suits certain characters. I know you're never preachy in your work, but your head is great for something like Punisher. Like I think, like Frank Castle can't really be written by somebody from my point of view. Like I think I'll always worry about the criminals and think they should have had a better upbringing, and there should have been more money should have been pumped into their area. Whereas I think you're the perfect Punisher writer. And that was the very first thing I saw of yours. The first scene of yours that I fell in love with. I was in a comic store. And one of my pals who's a comic store said to me, "Listen, check this out." And I was like, there's always every few weeks something like this happens, And they opened it up, and it was Punisher War Journal with Johnny Romita, and it's the torture scene, where the Punisher got this guy tied up, and he's sticking the ice lolly in his back, and and the guy thinks he's been burned alive, but it's an ice lolly in his back. And what was so cool about that is if I'd done it, I'd have done it with the blowtorch. But you made it the ice lolly, which was such a great touch, and then shoved it in the guy's mouth at the end of the scene. It's a cracking scene. But like,
I didn't want Frank Castle to be a sadist.
Yes, yeah.
Which I don't like it. I don't want my heroes to be torturing people. that's a line I don't want them to cross. That's just horrible. So yeah, I had to. It was actually I had done an earlier scene, something like it.
Yeah.
In another book called Black Terror with. Using Novocaine and an electric toothbrush and a chainsaw, the sound of a chainsaw. And my editor said, "I love that guy. Use that in Punisher." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Do the same thing." I said, "I can't do the same thing." So I had to come up with another, no impact torture scene.
That was great because, like I said, the British writer would go all the way, but I loved the wit of what you did with it. I thought it was so clever, and that's what I kept an eye on you after that, like religiously. And I remember actually thinking you and Johnny are such a great team. And I was talking to Johnny last week, and I was like, you guys should work together all the time. I'm amazed that you didn't become a Scorsese and De Niro, and you should now. I think you guys are such a great blend together. I think, and he agreed.
No, I loved working with him. And he was a guy. Well, you've written for him. I mean, what he brings back to the table is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you do this, but I picture the pages in my head. They never turn out the way I imagine them. But wow, they really didn't turn out the way I imagined them when Johnny would do them. It's like, oh my God, you brought so much more to this.
I mean, I've got the kind of idiot's version of it in my head when it's the little doodles and everything. But Johnny, I mean, every punch looks like it's knocking out 5 teeth. The atmosphere is real. There's slobber coming out of people's mouths. I mean, he's like a director. He's a cinematographer. He's brilliant.
Yeah.
And was that what Denny O'Neil saw then? Whenever you went over to DC, was it your Punisher that kind of got Denny?
No, it was actually Airboy that got Denny interested in me. because I was doing the Batman stuff before I was doing the Punisher stuff.
Right. All right.
So he liked how I wrote a younger character.
Right.
He thought I'd be a good fit for Robin.
Which it was. I mean, that Tim Drake Robin run worked out absolutely brilliant. And I remember my nephew was obsessed with it because I was starting to work in comics at the time, and I used to always give him my stuff before I had my own kids. You know, I'd always give him my stuff, and he'd be like, he'd just put it to one side, and he'd get into my DC comp box and take out Your Robin book, and he read Green Lantern and Your Robin before he even looked at it. But that was a great run. It's funny. I'm always fascinated by guys like you. You know, like there's quite a few guys do this who will have a really beloved 70-issue run like Robin or Batman even more. You know, just like years on Batman. I'm more an in and out guy. You know, I kind of come in, I do an 8-issue run, then I'm out again. And I learned that from Frank Miller. Frank Miller says, be like an assassin. Like, come in, do the job, and get out the window before anyone has an opinion. Really. But do you see a real strength in those big, long runs, you know, to kind of, do you go to places you maybe don't anticipate in the first year and so on? You know, what draws you to doing those big epic runs?
I just like the idea of digging in on this cast of characters, and then the challenge is to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
You know, and keep things moving. And, you know, especially when we got to the point where we were told to write for the trade.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow, I'm writing like a series of feature films, you know, and, you know, I was just the guy who stayed on the book till the wheels came off, because you didn't know if you're going to get another book. So you work real hard to make sure you weren't boring everybody, and just keep things different and changing. I mean, on the Robin book, there's a lot of changes that character goes through in a lot of different ways over the 100 or so issues I wrote.
Yeah. I thought it was 70. Was it over 100 then you did on
I wrote 100 issues of the monthly, and then mini-series, annuals, specials, 80-page giants. So it's probably close to like 125 Robin comics.
And I guess also when you're doing Batman, you're like, where do you go from there? You know, you don't want to go from Batman to a minor character. You know, it's the biggest selling book. So once you're on that gig, I guess it's so prestigious.
Yeah.
Doing that,
plus, I just loved working on it. I mean, who wouldn't love that universe?
Yeah.
And there's so much to play with.
Yeah.
That you know, detective stories, action stories, martial arts stories, you know, whatever could fit into that. And the characters are incredible. I got a kick every time I type the words Batman and Robin.
Batman, if you think about it, you're right. It's like Doctor Who. Doctor Who stories can be set anywhere in time or space. So you're only limited by your imagination. Batman's kind of the same, although you think of it as Gotham City. There's a million types of stories you can do with Batman, isn't it? It's a big concept.
Yeah, and you know, you got this rich cast of villains, and then, you know, we were encouraged to create more villains. Yeah. You know, the interrelationships of all the characters, the running gags. I mean, I just loved all of it. The gadgets and creating new gadgets.
Yeah.
I remember proposing that Batman would have drones, because I had read about drones.
Right. And
he should have bat drones watching over the city, and they told me that was preposterous.
So your era in Batman would be Doug Moench, I guess, and Alan Grant with you at the same time. Was there a period where you weren't with those guys? Were there other guys at the same time?
Well, I was brought on. Alan was there first, and then Doug and I were hired close together.
Right.
And then we were all fired together. We were all fired at the same time. So I continued on Batman-related books like Nightwing and Robin, but I was off of detective.
Right. And
but we were, you know, went to maybe 4 summits together. And, you know, we played together nice.
And it's funny because you're 3 very different types of people as well, aren't you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, Doug I only know from reputation. Alan I knew well from when I was a teenager. Alan was incredibly helpful to me when I was starting out. He would read over my scripts and things when I was sending them in to 2000 AD and everything. And he did that with Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, a whole bunch of other British guys. Wow. He was kind of the quiet godfather of British comics, you know. And but he was a very interesting personality, Alan, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you guys all click well then, even though you were so different?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Doug can be a prickly pear, but you know, when it came down to the work, we got along. I remember. I wish I had a Polaroid of the. We would discuss politics, and then go back to work. I wish I had a Polaroid of when I told Doug I thought the Vietnam War was justified. But we, you know, no, we got along great, and the editorial staff then was you couldn't ask for a better team. I mean, all talented people. You know, Denny and the guys he had hired to assist him, and yeah, I mean, and you can kind of see it in the work. I mean, we don't really drop a stitch. We all cooperated story wise, and we all got it. We were all there for the same reason. You know, we liked the character. We wanted to do the best work we could, and you know. We were all trying to show each other up. So
it's interesting because, like, I only very briefly worked on the Superman books in a very limited capacity. But I remember thinking it was such a hard way to write, though. You know, when you had multiple people telling one story, where somebody would start it, somebody would do part 2, somebody else part 3, and then you're back for part 4. Did you ever find that frustrating, or did it flow well for you?
No, it you know, the summits helped. I mean, I don't think we could have done that level of work, quality wise, if we hadn't had the summits. And it was just I can't even remember how many whiteboards the assistant editors would fill up, and we would break it all down, but it was done in such a way that everybody got great scenes, you know, and everybody knew where they had to begin their story and end their story. The rest of it was up to them. And I don't know, it just was a real camaraderie. I mean, we all understood it, and you know, we had Denny, you know, riding herd on us. But he hired us because he knew we'd meet deadlines, and he knew we loved the franchise, and we knew we were, you know, storytellers. So, you know, so it all clicked. It all came together.
And Denny's obviously one of the greatest Batman writers of all time, and there's 2 types of editor, isn't there? There's the type that sits back, you know, and lets you do your thing, and then there's the one who really gets in there with you, you know, rolls up their sleeve for good or for bad. What type of editor was he? Because he was so invested in Batman, it was the cornerstone of his career. You know, was he heavy with you guys, or what?
No, he didn't micromanage at all. His idea was he was hands off. He hired you to do the job because he thought you could do the job. If you screwed up, you were gone.
Right.
But he only ever called me twice with things he thought I did wrong.
Yeah.
And you know, both of them were Denny things. On my second Robin miniseries, I wanted Joker to kill a villain, a Batman villain, and take over his gang. Instead of forming his own gang, he's going to take someone else's away. And then he said, Mr. Freeze, have him kill Mr. Freeze. Then he hates Mr. Freeze, hated Mr. Freeze. And so I had Joker kill Mr. Freeze. And then we had one of those things where there was a crossover event or something like that. And all of a sudden, they realized that they needed a one-off issue of Detective. And I had only a few days to write it. And I couldn't think of anything else except, well, what if Mr. Freeze wasn't dead? He's Mr. Freeze after all. He's frozen. And so I brought Mr. Freeze back to life. And that's when Denny called me. And he was steamed. He says, I hate that character. I didn't want that character. I said, I was stuck for a story. And we got to bring him back someday, which the animated series started shortly thereafter. So we were going to have to bring him back anyway. But he was so angry. And another time, he and I disagreed on Two-Face. I always thought it was silly that if Two-Face flipped a coin and didn't go his way, that he wouldn't just cheat or flip it again. And he said, no, he always go with the coin flip. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me, but I will never write it differently. And an artist did something off my script that indicated, you know, the opposite of what Denny, and he called and was yelling at me. And I said, read the script. Don't look at the art. Read the script. I didn't write that. So, but those were the only times. But, you know, for a guy to be that invested in the characters and everything, I don't mind being yelled at over those kind of issues.
Well, I feel as if it's Denny and he's giving you a note on Batman, you kind of have to listen, don't you? It's like, he knows the character better than anyone, you know? It's funny, it just reminded me, I remember getting a script and some artwork back one time, and somebody was getting strangled with cheese. There was hundreds of cheese around somebody and they were squeezing. And I was like, what the hell is this? You know, it made no sense. Going on for a page and a half. And then when I checked back at the script, it was cheese wire. And the scripts were being translated for a Spanish artist. And he'd drawn this cheese beautifully, choking Judge Dredd, you know, and I was like, you know, so I just rewrote the script, you know. But like, it's funny, those Batman retreats. I mean, I've been to a lot of Marvel retreats, which have a very corporate sort of setting, but very informal once you're actually in there. The Marvel ones, you go to, because there's so many people, they go to an office outside the Marvel building, and it's a 40-seater sort of table in this huge square in a lawyer's office up on the 8th floor of this building. And there was myself and Brian Bendis and usually a couple of other writers, but then the rest was the entire editorial team, you know? So what was the, I always had a feeling the Batman retreats were somewhere nice though, like that you guys went to the countryside or something like that. Like what did you guys do?
The best ones was when they would take us to the Biddle estate, which was like a millionaire's estate, which had been turned into a resort.
Right.
And we would meet in a room that looked like Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson would solve a murder in it. It was just really awesome Victorian library type room that we would meet in. We just sit in these big leather chairs and a bunch of whiteboards and hash it out. It was usually a small group, but as Nightfall became actually hugely profitable, we brought more people in. We had artists there a couple of times as well.
Yeah. That's a perfect setting for a Batman, a Bruce Wayne story.
Yeah,
in absolutely. Like Wayne Manor, you know. I
don't know. Very much like Wayne Manor. Yeah.
I don't want to say the guy's name because I haven't had this verified. But have you heard of the comic book writer who's had his house done up like Wayne Manor, and he has bat poles in his house?
No, I have not.
One of my friends told me he was up at the house, so this is apparently true. And it's like he has an office done up like Bruce Wayne's 1966 office, you know. There's a Shakespeare bust that you flip back, you press a button, the wall slides back, there's 2 poles, and you go down, you slide down the poles into a Batcave where he does most of his work, you know. It was a lot of 90s royalties. That's a clue to who it is. A lot of 90s royalties.
Yeah, there's a few suspects there.
It could be any one of us, couldn't it? Yes.
Yeah. There were a bunch of millionaires made back then.
But from DC, you went on to CrossGen, which to me is one of those periods in history that doesn't get talked about enough, because as a creator, it was such a fascinating experiment, the CrossGen thing. Do you remember? I mean, you must have seen, like I did, the ad in Wizards where they were saying, do you want to be a comic writer or a comic artist?
Right.
Are you already doing it? Come along to this place. And it sounds like a sci-fi movie or something. You go off to Florida in this camp that's been built, you know?
Right.
Can you tell me about that whole experience? How did it all kick off for you?
Well, I was, Denny retired and I was getting less enchanted with the editorial staff at DC. The kindest thing I can say about them is they were indifferent. Seemed indifferent to everything, with the quality of the comics, the talent, everything. And I just felt like I'm not going anywhere here. I'm writing 3 titles and that's it, but I'm not, they kept shooting down my pitches for crossovers and all the stuff. So I thought, okay, I'm ready for a change. And that's when the CrossGen people sent Ron Mars and Butch Geist to talk to me and say, why don't you come down to Florida?
Yeah.
So I went down and I just fell in love with the whole setup. I'm going to be here with my art team. I mean, this is going to be awesome, like an animation studio.
Yeah.
So I went for. I told my wife this is going to be my midlife crisis.
And what was it like? Because I mean, we grew up obviously with the talk of the Marvel bullpen and everything, which wasn't entirely accurate because Johnny Romita Sr. was up in Long Island and everything. But you had this vision of all the guys working in the one space. But this was the first time, I think, in history, everyone actually was in the one space. The writers and artists were all in one compound. What was the environment? I mean, was it fun? Was it intense?
Oh yeah. Oh, it was a blast. I mean, you got to see everybody's original art collection, everybody's toy collection, and the quads were, they worked in these big quads. The facilities were terrific.
Yeah.
And I had an office, but everybody else, the writers had offices, and everybody else worked out in like this open quad area.
Yeah.
They were like super cubicles, and I made a lot of friends there. I got to work with guys I'd worked with for a while. Get to know them better. We'd go to hockey games together, movies together. I mean, just hanging out. It was, and then you had your team there, so there was no nobody was getting strangled with cheese. There were no mistakes allowed to be made, and there were no editors.
Yeah.
So mostly, you just had to. They either left you alone, or you had to go in and argue with Mark Alessi, the owner. And I on creative issues, I always won with him. Mm-hmm. Business issues, not so much. You wouldn't listen. Right. But it was a blast. I'm not sorry I did it at all. I'd go back in a heartbeat.
I think it sounds fascinating. And how many years were you there? A couple of years? Or?
was like 2.5 years it lasted until it all went bust.
And everybody's family's obviously there as well, you know. I mean, because it must be strange because our job historically for 100 years is guys working from home. All of our friends are kind of real world friends, you know, people who do other jobs, aren't they, you know? And then we get to meet up occasionally. And it's really amazing when we all meet up because we so rarely see other guys who work in the industry. But that must have been the first time you're in a comic environment, you know, a comic world. You'll be socializing at nighttime and working together by day. You know, like how many people are we talking here, like in that building?
Well, when the building was full, it was probably like 80 people working at a time. But some guys came in and worked overnights. I mean, we broke the corporate culture pretty quick because, you know, they wanted it to be a 9-to-5 job, and we were all like, "Well, hell with that." I mean, I'd roll in at 11.
Yeah.
And they'd send somebody around and go, "You should have been here at 9." And I said, "You know, how far ahead am I on my scripts?" I'd be like 3-4 months ahead.
Yeah.
I said, "Everybody's got stuff to do. They know what to do. I got a phone."
Yeah.
I said, it's no big deal. And then there were some guys who just started working at night because they didn't want to be hassled.
Right.
Because there was a little bit of hassling going on from Mark Alessi. And if you didn't push back, he kept hassling you.
Right, right.
My favorite story was when they hired Steve Epting and he was doing a page with a woman on it. Mm-hmm. And Mark Alessi came around and he said, "I want the woman, make her hair longer, or make her legs longer." And he's doing all these changes. And, you know, make those changes. And Steve put his pencil down. He turned to Mark and he said, "Like hell, I will." And Mark never made any more suggestions.
Because I've always wondered, like Frank Quitely and I talk about this all the time. Like we said, I mean, Frank will maybe do a page a week or 2 pages a week or something, and he's hyper detailed. He tears up more than he draws, you know, like it's very important to him that the work is perfect. And I said to him, if a mafia guy like come in and put a gun at your head and you weren't allowed to leave the table until you drew, you know, you could probably do 10 pages a week, you know, it's because if you're forced to do it, if you're not rubbing out and everything. And I wonder if that's what it's a bit like with CrossGen, you know, because the boss was literally standing there. Was the productivity good for the artist? Did they speed up more than they would at home?
Well, I mean, all these guys, I told Mark over and over again, I said, 99% of the guys you hired were self-starters.
Yeah.
I said, all you had to do was give them a FedEx box and a due date. And they put it in that box and get it there on time. I said, I don't know how you did that because there's so many freaking deadbeats in this business. Somehow you hired guys that just knew how to use a calendar.
Yeah.
And they didn't need to be bothered. And his only restriction was 1 page a day. He just wanted 1 page a day. Right. Just do your best work. You have all the time just to do your best work.
Yeah.
But, you know, and most of the guys did that, but Paul Pelletier, man, he couldn't be strapped down. I don't know how many pages a day that guy did, and they were incredible. I mean, Paul Pelletier blossomed at CrossGen.
Yeah,
and he just was turning out pages. It was insane. He could have kept 3 inkers busy.
That's amazing. And when did you get a sense that it wasn't working as a company? When did you feel it early, or was it a surprise when it happened? Or
no, I told my wife before I signed the contract, I said, I think this is going to last 2 years because I've been at enough comic companies to see the signs.
Yeah.
But I said, but I want to be here. I want to do this. This is exciting. But yeah, you could see the signs. They were spending way too much money on promo and they were spending money on all the wrong things. And, you know, and they just had some crazy ideas about circulation and things like that.
And it's funny,
but you know, and the Uber story, I hated the Uber story that all the comics connected to one big gigantic saga.
I hate that in movies as well. I mean, I think it's hard enough to do a good movie. You know, don't connect them all. You know, and the weakest one pulls down the best one as well, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got there, they gave me these binders full of detailed descriptions of the saga. I never read one of them. I would leave one open on my desk so it looked like I actually was reading it, but I never read them. I did just enough to satisfy, you know, their requirements.
You know, when an animal is out of the wild for a couple of years and then they try and reintroduce them to the wild, it must have been a bit like that coming back to comic books afterwards, you know, like coming back to New York and DC and Marvel. Were they weird with you? Because I found when I leave a company and you go back, it's kind of like when people step out of an elevator, isn't it? And go back in, it's like the furniture's been rearranged, like you no longer quite have a place. And I even quite quickly that happens. Did you find DC and Marvel very different when you came out of CrossGen?
Well, I never worked for Marvel again after that, and I wasn't that welcome at DC. A lot of the same people that I left were. I mean, my main editor, he said that he didn't like the way I left.
Right.
And he would tell people that I left abruptly and it was rude and everything else.
Yeah.
I gave them 6 months notice.
Right.
And I was still writing my books while I was at CrossGen. I got like special dispensation that I could complete these arcs.
Yeah.
At CrossGen. And then my editor was saying that he didn't even come to our last meeting, like our goodbye meeting.
Yeah.
Our last meeting was on September 12th, 2001.
Oh my God.
The second to the last day in the calendar you ever wanted to be in New York City.
My God.
I mean, I couldn't even get through to tell them I'm not coming in.
Who was the editor, if you don't mind me asking?
It was Bob Schreck.
He
just had it in for me.
I never had any dealings with him, actually. I think I was leaving DC about the time he was sort of rising. So he was editing Batman, because I thought, was Denny not in Batman right till the end of your run then?
No. Denny retired, and then they brought on Bob Schreck as group editor.
Right.
And he was hands off to everybody. Like I said, he was indifferent.
Yeah.
I don't think he really cared what went in the comics. And then for whatever reason, got be in his bustle about me and wanted me gone.
I think it's the same though with any job, isn't it? Where once you've been at the same company for a little while, they take you for granted, and it is just naturally time to move on and go somewhere else. Like Marvel always struck me as a very, very logical place for you. Like I would love to see your Captain America. Like, I don't think I've ever seen you do Captain America.
No.
But I mean, I'd love to see a 3-year run on Cap with you. I mean, it would be awesome, And there's a lot of characters I think you'd work at. Have you ever spoken to the Marvel guys? Are you still?
No, I was told by somebody inside that I would be welcome back if I apologized. And I said, apologize for what?
Yeah.
And basically apologize for my political stances. And I said, well, I'm never going to do that, because that's the contents of my mind. It's like, I'm sorry I think the way I do. I mean, what difference does that make? I mean, I'm a comic book writer. I don't put that stuff in my stories.
That's like a Franz Kafka story or something where the writer has to go and apologize for his thoughts.
And like you said, it's like, I'm against quantitative easing, so I can't work for you.
That's nuts. What year was that? When did you hear that?
Wow, it would have been right after CrossGen, so it was probably like 2006, 2007.
So I thought America only went mad about 5 years ago. So this kind of, there was a bit of a thing even 15 years ago like that.
Yeah, it was starting. Starting where they hold that again. But like I said, sometimes it wasn't all politics. Sometimes if you didn't like the same music they like. I mean, I remember once saying like the mildest criticism of a movie that an editor had a poster of on his wall, just the mildest criticism. It was a movie I liked, but he had the mild criticism. And man, he just never wanted to work with me. It's like, what is wrong with you?
Wow. The guy I've always seen you as in the kind of comic group is John Milius. Like you seem to me like the comic book John Milius.
Yeah, well, I'll take that. I'll take that as a compliment.
Everybody loves John Milius. It's like that whole gang, you couldn't get more leftist guys, than Scorsese and Spielberg and all these guys,
Right.
But they needed John Milius because he was that guy in the gang, and he would be the foil, and they needed him for the Jaws scene to come in and write that great speech, about the ship going down and everything. He brought something to the table they didn't,
over and over again they would call him for things like that, and because he was the guy. It's like me, it's like, well, we have this military theme thing, we'll call Chuck.
Yeah.
So, because he'll do the homework.
So that's really interesting. So even back then, I was unaware of that. It's funny because, I live in Scotland, so I'm a million miles away from all this stuff.
Right.
But I didn't realize back then that was an issue. I know it kind of is a little bit now, although, like I say, thankfully coming to an end, So, but yeah, you're doing Cap. The other thing I'd love to see you do a lot of that pulpy stuff as well. You and Adam Kubert doing Kazar or something would be.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was always more of a Marvel guy anyway.
Yeah.
That is evident from what I was saying when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I never was part of the Marvel mainstream. I was off doing Punisher or Conan or something like that.
Yeah. And like, I mean, if you had to pick a Marvel book now, you know, what would you do? What would be if you could be on any one, what would you choose?
Well, my stock answer to that one is always I'd love to do like a 2-year run on Fantastic Four with Graham Nolan.
That would be fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't expect that answer. You know, that's not what I expect. You know, but I guess you're flexing muscles you don't generally flex, isn't it? Doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like the challenge. And Graham and I have talked. We even know what our first arc would be. We've talked about it over and over again.
But do you think in general there's an anti-conservative bias? Then do you think this is a problem across the entire American media? Do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, if you're powerful enough, they have to leave you alone. If you're popular enough, but yeah, you're. I guess a lot of guys hide it. I never felt a need to hide it.
Yeah,
I said this is, we have freedom of speech. I'm not for like killing babies or burning down hospitals. It's like it's just our viewpoints are slightly different here.
Yeah.
We're still all Americans. But yeah, I mean, but I see it coming to an end. Now, will people be welcome back? And the thing is, there's a lot of underemployed comic artists and writers in America, and it's not necessarily politics that got them there. Like I said, they just weren't part of the clique. They didn't go to school with that guy, or they didn't go to the same comic book shop as that guy, and so they don't get the work. They get passed over. But then you have super woke comics like at Marvel and DC, where it just seems to be agenda driven over anything else. And of course, I'm not welcome there. I'm an anathema. I mean, somebody told me recently he was in a comic shop in LA and he was looking for my run of Nightwing. And the guy, the store owner said, I won't carry anything written by him. I was like, well, that's insane.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's a business, isn't it? I mean, imagine you made cars, but you only sold them to people who were ideologically aligned with you. It's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's getting that way. It's frightening when you see corporate America going in for this stuff. Where they're like, well, what kind of business do you have? Well, you can't use our credit card service. And it's like, whoa.
But what's interesting about corporate America, though, is they're the most insincere people on earth, though. So as soon as something shifts in another direction, they will shift faster than you can imagine.
Yeah.
And that includes the films. Like any film studio, will go where the money is. I mean, ultimately, it's just about cash, isn't it? I whenever I see, what they say on Twitter and everything, I'm like, no, let's see you pay your taxes. If you're really virtuous, pay your taxes. Like don't put a tweet up in support of something. So again, I'm an old school leftist. For me, it's all about pay your tax. And then the country's better for it. But like, it's interesting though, because I think you're right. I think there is a shift in the air, and I think it's been here for about a year. Like Top Gun 2 was a very interesting thing to happen, wasn't it? I saw the projections on that, and they were looking at 350 to 400 million, and it made 1.55 billion, and everybody's like, hang on a minute, that wasn't, who's that appealing to, and then you see Yellowstone, which is my favorite show on television, which everybody adores, and Terminal List, The Boys is fantastic, so I think people are starting to think, well, hang on, maybe things don't have to be as narrow as we think, and we can try lots of things here, lots of different voices.
Well, even on the corporate level, it's encouraging because you see Netflix saying to its employees, if you don't like our content, go work somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah.
Because people say to me, oh, Netflix, it's all so liberal and everything else. I say, no, it's really not. There's a lot of, I'm not going to say conservative content, but a lot of traditional content on Netflix, in addition to the whatever you want to call it, the more diverse, the more woke entertainment. There's a little bit of everything. And even Amazon, which was the wokest of the woke with Terminal List and Reacher and things like that, are starting to realize there's an audience for this.
Yes.
And my son, who follows a lot of this business, was telling me that the guy from Discovery Channel who took over Warner's, he was canceling projects left and right that were agenda-driven money losers.
Yes.
He said, I want you to start making a Robert De Niro gangster movie now. I mean, he didn't care what it was about, what it was called, everything else. And I said to my son, well, that guy gets it.
Well, it's
Who doesn't want to see another Robert De Niro gangster movie? Everybody wants to see that.
But that's what I mean. I think there's room for everything, isn't there? You know, like the extreme left, the extreme right, but actually moderate is what everybody wants, isn't it? Because most people are kind of in the center, aren't they? Most people are sensible. And I think this about comics as well. Like all these guys who argue with each other online and try and destroy people's lives and get them to kill themselves and all that, you know, you put them in a room and they'll all probably get on, you know, like generally, like if you put two comic guys together, they're best friends within 5 minutes. I think, you know, we've got so much in common.
It's a brotherhood. Yeah. They got something in common.
Yeah. So, do you know, a couple last questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but one of my friends was telling me that you were in for Expendables 2, which I didn't know. I actually hadn't heard this, that Stallone personally brought you in to talk about potentially doing Expendables 2. What's the story behind that? What happened there?
I wrote an Expendables prequel for Dynamite, and it was based on Stallone's original screenplay for Expendables, which was vastly different than the movie they made. And he called me out of the blue. I got a call. This woman says, "Will you hold for a call from Sylvester Stallone?" And I thought, it's got to be one of my friends, right? And he gets on. I'm like, holy crap, it's him. And he said he loves comics, and he really liked how I handled the characters and the dialogue. I got their voices right. Yeah. And would I like to come in and help him do rewrites on Expendables too? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And he had them fly me out to Hollywood for a production meeting, which he was at, and we presented our new ideas. And I didn't know anything about production meetings. I'm sure you're very well versed in them, and it went well. But then I found out that every production meeting seems to go well until you leave the room. They offered me a low ball price for like 65 pages of rewrites that no one would accept.
Right.
And I said, no, I can't do it for that amount. But the thing is, this is the weird thing is Sly didn't forget about me. He kept calling.
Yeah.
And he got me work at a video game company doing dialogue for an Expendables game.
Yeah.
Got me work doing Lionsgate, web content for Lionsgate. And then every once in a while I would just call and I think because I was an outsider, he could tell me stuff that he couldn't talk to anybody in the business. So it's every once in a while I'll hear from him out of the blue. And of course we're doing stuff together comics wise now. We did Expendables Go to Hell, and we're doing a new Rambo graphic novel. So
that's it for Splato Comics, you know. So like So when is that available that people can have it in their hands? Because I know there's been a campaign for it, you know.
Well, all the art's done. It's almost all colored. I guess it'll be at the printers. I would say February at the latest. It'll be in the hands.
That's awesome.
But everything's done. So.
And Sly's one of those guys you want to be a good guy. So he sounds like he's a good guy. You like him, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, you know how it is. If they can't use you, they forget you the minute they hang up the phone. And he had no reason to remember. You know, hey, this guy got shot down doing rewrites. Screw him. You know, he goes right out of my Rolodex. But kept calling me. I mean, it's like, holy crap. I would say we liked talking to each other. I mean, at the reduction meeting, we were completing each other's sentences.
That's amazing.
So and he's a great storyteller. People think of him only as a tough guy actor. He's an amazing storyteller.
The Rocky script is a masterpiece, isn't it? The first Rocky film, you know, absolutely amazing.
Well, I just talked to a guy recently. He was head of effects on Cliffhanger, and he told me how much of that movie that Stallone rewrote.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He basically like recreated that movie from page one on.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a terrific action film.
It's funny. There is that part of me, the producer side of my brain is terrified when I hear stuff like that, though, as well, because
I think that's the thing. When you hire him, you know you're going to get that.
Yeah.
You know. So if you don't want that, don't hire him. And I think that's the reason why he had he was in the wilderness for a while, career-wise. I think some people didn't like that about him.
Well, I think especially a script is so hard to get right, and then when it's done, the idea of somebody coming in and messing with it, or they're not shooting the next scene. Like, I won't name names, but a friend of mine was working with an actress who said, I'm not getting out my trailer unless this scene is rewritten this way. So they actually reshot the movie. They said, we'll do it your way and my way. And they ended up using another 2 weeks and shooting all of her stuff. And, you know, all the way it was supposed to be, and then just never used her stuff, you know. And that happens more often than you would think if it's a big enough name that they can pull that, you know. So it wasn't on one of my movies, thank God, but one of my friends went to hell with us. You know?
Imagine the money. You just pissed that money away.
That's why these movies went from costing 100 million to 200 million to 300 million, just stupid stuff like that.
God.
But you know, it's funny, your novels as well. You know, I'm actually going to check these out because I love Jack Reacher and all that kind of stuff. You know, and you seem so in that wheelhouse. You know, you've got your 11 Cades and all. You know, you've got 3 series of novels going, haven't you? I think. Yeah.
What's that?
You've got Bad Times. You've got 11 Cade, and there's a 3rd series. Of
I'm doing a Western series called Sidewinders,
right.
And then I got some one-off novels.
But how are they going? Well, are they going good for you?
Yeah. My publisher recently hired an actual book guy instead of somebody who studies algorithms all day. And my sales went up dramatically when a book guy took over, because it's like they were looking at numbers and trends. And this guy's like, no, you just have to do this, and this. You know, he was talking about trade dress on the covers and things like that. And the sales went up dramatically. So I'm happy. I got in at the tail end of the ebook gold rush when the money was fantastic.
Great.
And then it sort of went away as Amazon adjusted their algorithms.
But all it takes is one of these things to be a show, and then those books will go crazy, like Jack Reacher.
Oh yeah. I've actually got a full-time agent now for the first time, and he's got some interest in a few things. So, we'll see. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. He always says, "You don't sound excited." I said, "Why would my heart was broken years ago? Why would I get excited when the check comes and my name is on it?" I'm excited.
It's funny what you said earlier about Hollywood. Every meeting seems to go well. That was a lesson I learned years ago. I was in a meeting with the head of a studio, and I came out on cloud 9, right? And everything I said, the guy agreed with me, and he said, "We should do this. I could see this actress for this actor for this." And when I got into the car, my agent was waiting for me. And I said, "I think I've just met my new best friend. This guy's brilliant, And he said, "That's his job, to make you feel good. He'll not do any of these things, So and it was the biggest surprise for me is that Hollywood is not as harsh as everybody thinks. It's actually just always nice. And then you never hear anything when it's bad news. It just goes silent, So that's it's not Jack Warner shouting at you. It's not all that.
No. They're all very, very nice. "Can I get you some coffee? Are you okay? Is that you're comfortable enough? And how was your weekend?" And then you leave there thinking, I think everybody leaves every production meeting thinking, "I'm a multimillionaire." This is, I mean, my agent now, because I've never had an agent before, because I fire them or they're no use to me or whatever. And I've stuck with this guy for a while. And he says, why do you trust me? And I said, "Because you've never once said, I want to be in the Chuck Dixon business."
Do you know, I'm embarrassed to say the guy ended our meeting, my first meeting with the head of that studio, saying that exact thing. And I walked out thinking, this is the best day of my life, So that's so weird you say that.
Yeah,
I'd never heard it before, so I was loving it.
I've heard it a lot, and it was always a lie.
So listen, Chuck, where can people see more of you then? Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of stuff.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. And I do regular comics at Archaven on ArcTunes. It's a free digital service.
Great.
So I'm around. We're just going on Amazon, buy something.
That's the best place to see you, isn't it?
That's the best place. That's the history of me, is right there.
Listen, thanks very much for taking the time. It was brilliant talking to you. I hope we somehow the stars align and we're at the same convention bar sometime soon.
Sure thing. No, this was great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a good conversation.
Great talking to you, Chuck. All the best.
All right. Okay. Bye.
Yeah, good night then.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, we've got The Magic Order, American Jesus and Nightclub Issue 1 this month for only $1.99. Next month, Nemesis Reloaded. The final orders will be coming in soon, so don't miss it. See you next week.